I always thought the ocean would soothe me on the day my daughter got married. I pictured gentle waves brushing the shore like old lullabies, salty air curling into my lungs, cleansing whatever ache I carried. I never imagined the ache would come from her. The beach was dressed like a dream, white chairs lined in perfect arcs, orchids curling around bamboo posts, and sheer ivory curtains dancing in the breeze. Guests in linen and pastel moved like polished sea glass, sipping from flutes of champagne. Everything shimmered, but not a single shimmer touched me. I stood beneath a palm tree, half-shadowed, holding a glass I hadn't sipped from. The champagne was warm now, the bubbles long gone. I had imagined this day 100 ways, each one full of light and music and laughter. But here, under this golden sun, I felt like a ghost with a mother of the bride pin pressed into her chest like a label. For a stranger, Claire was breathtaking. A fitted lace gown hugged her like a secret. Her dark curls were pinned with pearls, and her smile, well, her smile wasn't for me. She moved through the crowd like a bride in a magazine, elegant, unreachable. I clutched a small velvet box in my palm, thumb pressed into its soft corner. Inside was my grandmother's brooch, a delicate spray of sapphires and seed pearls. A family heirloom passed down from women who loved hard and suffered quietly. I was meant to give it to Claire before she walked down the aisle, a whispered moment between mother and daughter. I hadn't even been invited to her dressing suite. So I made my way toward the cabana. The sand was hot through my shoes. I tried to smile at passing guests, but most didn't recognize me, or pretended not to. Just when I reached the edge of the shaded area, a hand reached out and gripped my wrist. Firm, not friendly. Nathan. He stepped out from behind a sheer curtain, like the devil sliding into daylight. His tailored beige suit was tight at the shoulders, and his smile was all teeth. "Eleanor," he said. His voice dipped in the kind of charm that smells like cologne and poison. "We need to talk. Now." I stared at his hand. He let go, but not before giving my wrist a final squeeze, like a warning. "I'm here to see Claire," I said calmly. "Oh, you'll see her," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "But let's keep this civilized." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There's a problem, you see. The wedding budget went over. Claire and I have been covering the overages, but we figured, since you're here, and since you've always said you want to support her." I blinked, not fully registering what I was hearing. He smiled wider. "We need 50 grand. Today." I let the silence spread like smoke between us. I wanted to laugh, but my throat felt sewn shut. "Excuse me?" I whispered. "It's not a big ask, really. You have it. You always kept your money close, but now's the time to show you're really family." Something inside me cracked, quietly, like old porcelain. But before I could respond, Claire stepped out from behind the curtain. Her eyes met mine, cool and dry. The little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms wasn't there anymore. "Nathan told me you were being difficult," she said flatly. "Mom, this isn't about you. It's about making sure this day goes smoothly. You said you didn't want drama." I swallowed hard. "You're asking me to buy my seat at your wedding?" "I'm asking you to be part of this family," she said. "And if you can't, maybe it's best you head back to the hotel, or home, whatever." Her voice was soft, cold, clinical. "And if I say no?" I asked. Nathan slid his hand around her waist like a serpent. "We'll make sure you're not part of the photos," he said. "Or the thank yous. Or the baby showers. Or anything." My knees went weak, but I stayed standing. The box in. My hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I see," I said, lifting the champagne flute and taking the first sip. It was bitter, dry, and perfect. Claire turned to go, but I stopped her with a gentle voice. "Before you go," I said, "you forgot one thing." They both froze. I smiled. A slow, practiced smile I'd worn through funerals and fundraisers, one that said nothing and everything. They looked at me like they expected a threat. I handed Nathan the champagne glass and gently placed the velvet box in my purse. Then I walked back to the beach alone. The waves were still whispering, but they weren't lullabies anymore. They were plans. Some women keep their favorite perfume in a bottle shaped like a memory. Mine sat on the corner of my dresser, untouched for years. Rose and amber, my late husband's favorite scent. I used to spray it when I missed him. I stopped spraying it when Claire stopped coming home. After Robert died, it was just the two of us. Claire was 12 when we buried him. She clung to my coat like it was the only solid thing left in the world. That day, I promised her two things. She'd never be alone, and I'd never let anyone hurt her. I kept the first half of that promise. The second? Well, time has a cruel sense of irony. Claire was always brilliant. Top of her class, poetry in her speech, stubborn in a way I admired. I gave her everything I had, including my time, my laughter, my sleepless nights. I built a business from the ground up, a boutique floral shop, and every penny not spent on bills was tucked away for her future. College, car, comfort. When she got into Stanford, I sobbed alone in my shop's storage room, surrounded by eucalyptus and peonies. I was proud and terrified. The first time she left home, I stayed up all night with her baby blanket folded in my lap. The silence of that house felt like abandonment, but I told myself that space was part of growth, that distance was temporary, that daughters always come back. She did come back. After 4 years, 2 internships, and a new wardrobe of designer shoes and carefully filtered Instagram smiles. But she wasn't the same. Her hugs grew shorter, her eyes calculating. She laughed less. And when she introduced Nathan, her voice changed completely. I remember the first dinner he attended. I made pot roast, Claire's childhood favorite, and he barely touched it. "I'm keto," he had said, smirking like I should have known better. "Oh," I replied. "Claire used to beg for seconds of this." "She used to beg for a lot of things," he replied, with a look that made my stomach twist. Claire laughed. It was sharp, unfamiliar, like glass cracking under pressure. From the beginning, Nathan made me feel like a prop. He called me Ma, in a tone that felt like an inside joke I wasn't part of. He'd comment on how tight I must run the purse strings, how Claire deserved to live big for once. His words weren't cruel, just pointed. Always just enough to sting. But every time I pulled Claire aside to express concern, she waved it off like I was a bitter old widow. "You're jealous, Mom," she once whispered, wine-blurred. "You had love. Maybe you're just mad I finally found mine." It was like being slapped with a silk glove. Polite, painless at first, but humiliating. I still helped them. Of course I did. I loaned them $40,000 for a down payment on their house, money I'd meant to put toward my retirement. Nathan barely thanked me. Claire sent a text with a heart emoji. When wedding planning began, I offered to help, not just with money, but time. I sewed lace into her veil. I contacted venues, even got on my knees to clean vintage silverware for the reception. Still, I was kept at arm's length. I was asked for things, not invited into them. The final straw came 6 months before, the wedding, when the planner emailed me the total vendor invoices. My chest tightened. $146,000. I called Claire and offered to contribute another $10,000, reminding her gently that I had only so much saved, and I needed to secure my future too. That was the last time she picked up my call. I texted. No reply. Left voicemails. Nothing. My presence shifted from essential to expendable. My role went from mother to optional guest. And somewhere, in the silence between unanswered messages, I began to realize something bitter and irreversible. I had lost her, not to a man, not to adulthood, but to something colder, a performance of success, a curated life where love had no weight unless it sparkled in photos. I kept the velvet box with the heirloom brooch in my bedside drawer, wrapped in tissue. Some nights, I opened it and ran my fingers over the sapphires, wondering if my own mother had ever felt this way, like a lighthouse with no ships left to guide. The perfume sat untouched beside it. I'd stopped wearing it because Claire once wrinkled her nose and said it was too old-fashioned. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had become old-fashioned, a relic of sacrifice. A mother who gave too much, hoping love would come back like a boomerang. But the truth hit me the night before the wedding, when I was still deciding whether to attend at all. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the velvet box, and I whispered, to the quiet, "If this is motherhood, then where did I go?" Weddings were always something I imagined watching from the front row. Eyes full of tears, hand holding a lace kerchief, heart blooming. But that night, I sat at a round table near the speakers, the only one with no name card, no centerpiece. The linens were ivory. My chair was plastic. People passed me like I was just another vendor clearing plates. No one asked how I knew the bride. Maybe they assumed I didn't. Maybe that was the point. The reception unfolded in front of me like someone else's memory. Claire was luminous under the fairy lights, her satin dress rippling like water. She and Nathan stood arm in arm, poised and perfect. They looked like models in an ad for happiness, something glossy and unreachable. When they took the stage for speeches, Claire raised her champagne flute and said, "To the people who believed in us from the start, especially Nathan's parents, who made today possible." Applause. I blinked. My hand trembled against the glass stem of my untouched wine. A camera flash caught her face in mid-laughter, and I swear she looked right through me. No mention of me. Not my name. Not even a polite nod. Not the woman who raised her. Not the one who wiped her tears after nightmares. Who took second jobs to keep her in ballet. Who sat through every college financial aid meeting like it was an Olympic event. Was the ghost at the feast. A server leaned down beside me and whispered, "Ma'am, are you part of the bride's family?" I nodded silently. She gave me a half-smile and cleared the salad plates. Mine hadn't been touched. The first dance started. The music rose like a spell. Claire floated across the parquet floor, in her husband's arms, laughing, spinning, radiant. And I realized that I no longer knew her. I knew a girl with skinned knees and glitter pens, not this woman smiling in a stranger's embrace. I stood up. No one noticed. I walked out past the chandeliers, past the roses I had selected months ago from a wholesale florist catalog. The ones I paid for. The cabana was empty. I kept walking, past the tiki torches and the laughing guests, until the music thinned behind me, and all I could hear was the ocean. The beach was cold, dark, infinite. I kicked off my shoes and walked, until the sand swallowed my ankles. My hand slipped into my purse and found the small velvet box, the brooch. I hadn't had the chance to give it to her. A sapphire and silver piece, my grandmother's. She used to say it carried the strength of the women before you. I had hoped to pin it to Claire's bouquet, but maybe that would have burned her hands. I opened the box. The jewel caught the moonlight for a second. Then I closed it again, pressing it to my chest like a wound. Behind me, voices. Nathan's voice. He was close, too close. She actually thought I cared, he was saying, laughing. All I had to do was mention money and poof, gone. She didn't even argue. A second voice. Male. Old women love being useful. Once you stop paying, they vanish. Easy. More laughter. I didn't breathe. My body turned to salt. Then, something inside me cracked. Not with rage, but with sorrow. A deep, echoing sorrow I didn't know I was capable of. I backed away slowly, barefoot in the sand, until I could no longer hear them. My chest burned, my throat closed, and I stumbled to a place near the water where the tide pulled at the hem of my dress. And then I broke. I dropped to my knees in the wet sand, the brooch still clutched tight in my fist. Tears spilled down my face in hot, ugly waves. I sobbed. Not like a grieving woman, but like a mother whose soul had been evicted. In my mind, I saw Claire again. 7 years old, her hair in messy braids I had done too quickly. She sat on the floor of our living room, painting on butcher paper with her fingers. Red hearts, blue suns, purple trees. She looked up at me and said, "When I grow up, I want to be kind like you." I remembered her sleeping on my lap in the hospital waiting room after Robert's accident, her tiny body curled into mine, her little hand gripping my blouse like it was her anchor. I remembered us dancing barefoot in the kitchen on Christmas Eve, her in pajamas, me in an apron dusted with flour, Bing Crosby on the radio. That little girl was gone, replaced, stolen, and I had helped it happen. I let her drift away, telling myself she'd come back. I gave her everything, even when she gave me silence. I gave until there was nothing left of me but credit card statements and dusty memories. I cried until I couldn't feel my face. Then the wind shifted. A shell rolled up near my foot. White, chipped, half buried in foam. It wasn't beautiful. It was broken. But something in it glimmered. I reached for it, not knowing why. It was sharp along the edges, like the words Nathan had spoken. I held it in my palm and looked at the horizon, where the sea kissed the sky like nothing had ever gone wrong. For a moment I considered it. The ocean was wide, cold, inviting. I could walk forward and never feel anything again. But the shell in my hand whispered something else. No, not like this. I stood, not because I felt strong, but because something stubborn inside me, something that looked like dignity, refused to die. I looked back at the twinkling wedding in the distance. I thought about Claire's smile, Nathan's voice, the silence at my table. Then I whispered, "To the dark. They may have taken her, but they won't take me." I tucked the shell into the velvet box beside the brooch. 2 broken things, 1 beautiful, and I walked back, not to the party but to myself. I drove with no destination. The road ribboned beside the sea, narrow and winding, like it too had lost its sense of direction. I passed towns without names, gas stations with dusty windows, diners where the waitresses looked like they'd heard every kind of heartbreak. The brooch sat in my glove compartment, beside the shell I found the night I nearly walked into the water. I didn't cry anymore. I just drove. By the 3rd day, the ocean opened up again before me, wider, calmer, as if waiting. A sign read, "Driftwell. Pop. 7:14. I didn't know what pulled me off the road. Maybe it was the name. Maybe it was the smell of salt and lavender in the air. Maybe I was just tired. The cottage sat at the edge of a cliff, whitewashed and crooked, like it had been borrowed from a dream. The shingles were faded teal. Wind chimes made of spoons tinkled from the porch. It looked forgotten, and I liked that. I wanted to be forgotten too. I knocked on the door. An older woman answered, wrapped in a shawl the color of storm clouds. Her hair was silver and wild, her eyes sharp but kind. "I don't rent often," she said. "People come for the view and leave when it rains." "I won't leave," I replied. She held my gaze, then opened the door wider. "Then come in. The kettle's on." Her name was Ruth. She had once been a painter, a teacher, a widow, and, though she didn't say it, a woman who had known loss. We didn't speak much that first week. I unpacked slowly, cooked quiet meals, walked barefoot, along the beach. The wind stripped me clean. On the 7th morning, Ruth knocked softly on the back door. "You'll need these," she said, setting down a dusty wooden box of paints and brushes. "The light here demands to be caught." I hadn't painted since Claire was 10. We used to do it together on Sundays, watercolors on the porch. She always painted suns with lashes and smiling clouds. I never kept any of her paintings. I wish I had. I started with shapes, circles, lines, anything to keep my hands busy. Then came seascapes, the cliff, the waves, the gulls like pieces of paper on the wind. But one afternoon, without meaning to, I painted a little girl with thick braids and eyes that searched the horizon. I didn't name her. I didn't need to. Painting was like breathing through grief. I spent hours in the sunroom, paint under my fingernails, brushstrokes loosening memories from my chest. I stopped wearing a watch. I stopped checking my phone. Ruth never pried. But sometimes she left things on my windowsill. Chamomile tea, sea glass, a photo of her late husband with a handwritten note. Gone, not erased. I began to sleep through the night. I journaled again. Small things, at first. What the tide sounded like. The scent of butter and sage in my kitchen. The way the gulls cried like they missed someone. But then, one evening, after a long walk, I wrote, "She may have been my daughter by birth, but I gave her more than she knew how to carry." I stared at the words until they blurred. I wasn't angry anymore. I was hollow in a way that felt cleaner. Like all the decay had been scraped out. Weeks turned to months. I found rhythm in solitude. I made soups with leeks and fennel. I let my hair turn fully gray. I stopped flinching at the word mother. One afternoon, Ruth brought over her old laptop. "You should share your work," she said. "People pay money for sunsets and sadness. Yours has both." I laughed. "I'm not an artist, just a woman who forgot how to live." She clicked a few buttons and raised an eyebrow. "Then let them remind you." To my surprise, the seascapes sold. Slowly at first, then steadily. People sent messages, how my brushstrokes reminded them of lost summers, of places they'd never been but somehow missed. I cried reading those notes. I wasn't a mother in those exchanges. I wasn't even Eleanor. I was something else. One night. After selling my 10th painting, I poured a glass of red wine, lit a candle, and opened the velvet box. I held the brooch in one palm, the shell in the other. One gleamed, the other was jagged. I pressed them both to my chest. Symbols, wounds, anchors. The brooch no longer felt like something I had failed to give. It was something I had reclaimed. The shell? It reminded me to keep breathing when everything in me wanted to disappear. The cottage no longer felt borrowed. It felt like mine. I bought a bigger canvas the next morning. And this time I painted. Myself. Not the version I'd once been, a giver with nothing left. But a woman with wind-worn skin, hands that created, eyes that saw, and a heart that still beat, steady and stubborn. I knew one day I would have to leave the cliff. Life waited beyond the tide. But for now, I had soup on the stove, paint on, my hands, and a view that didn't ask anything of me. For the first time in years, I was enough. It came in a plain white envelope, addressed in a sterile serif font, no return address. I almost didn't open it. I nearly tossed it into the fire with the week's kindling. But something in the weight of it, thicker than a bill, colder than Junk. Made me slit it open with the edge of a palette knife. It was from a lawyer. Not mine. The letter was concise, clinical. My name had been formally removed from Claire's estate planning documents. No medical power of attorney, no emergency contact, not even as a backup. The final line twisted like a blade. At the request of the client and her spouse, the individual known as Eleanor Fay shall no longer be considered a relevant familial contact for legal or financial matters. Relevant. I stared at the word for a long time. The cottage felt quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful that day. The wind had stilled. Even the gulls seemed to hush. I set the letter beside the shell on my windowsill. Later that week, Ruth brought me marmalade and asked if I'd like to go to the local gallery with her. I smiled, said I wasn't feeling well. Truth was, something had shifted. Not broken, not bruised, sharpened. I sat by the sea that night and thought about the brooch. It had belonged to my grandmother, a gold crescent moon cradling a single opal, pale as milk, iridescent in the right light. I had kept it tucked in my jewelry box for decades, waiting for the day I'd pass it to Claire. I imagined pinning it to her dress the morning of her wedding. I had practiced the speech in my head, about women and strength, about beauty passed down like stories, but I never gave it to her. Not after the way she looked through me that day. And yet, there, in the lawyer's attached documents, buried in a digital inventory of insured assets under Claire's name, I saw it. One antique opal brooch, late Victorian, presumed stolen. Claimed. My hand curled into a fist before I realized I was doing it. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I opened my old planner. I began writing dates, names, receipts, conversations I had half forgotten, now searingly clear. Nathan had always asked questions he shouldn't have, about my will, about my accounts. He once joked about me, having no need for pearls in the ground. I'd laughed politely, but my stomach had clenched. Now I felt it like a bruise pressing from the inside. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. Just patterns. Fractures. But what I found was a trail. Ruth's nephew, Miles, visited the cottage on weekends. He was quiet, kind, and suspiciously good with computers. When I asked if he'd help me dig a little, just check on a few suspicious online details, he nodded without asking why. 2 weeks later, he returned with a flash drive. "You should sit down," he said. Nathan had offshore accounts. 3, actually, under shell corporations with benign names: Clearwater Holdings, Fay Trust, my maiden name, my name, and something laughably bold, Mother's Nest Capital. He had siphoned money from Claire's accounts, small amounts at first, masked by house renovations, wedding planning, gifts. Nothing that would raise alarms unless someone was looking closely. And Claire, she had signed every form, either blindly or blindly in love. "He's good at what he does," Miles said, "and he's gotten away with worse." I stared at the drive in my hand, small and plastic. A box of ghosts. That night, I opened my art page inbox. There were messages, hundreds now, from women. Women who had bought my seascapes, who said my waves made them feel less alone. Women who shared stories of husbands gaslighting them, daughters disappearing, bank accounts drained in the dark. I wasn't a lone figure in a cottage anymore. I was part of something, wider, deeper. A current. I reached out to one of the women, who had sent a particularly eloquent message. She was a journalist. Freelance, sharp, deeply curious. We spoke over the phone for an hour. "I don't want revenge," I told her. "I want truth." She asked if I'd go on record. I declined, but I gave her the evidence. Not names, not Claire. But the documents, the pattern, the betrayal wrapped in silk and silence. She published an exposé on the financial abuse of aging parents, of how love is often the camouflage for control. It didn't name me, but it spoke for me. It went viral. The article spread like salt in a wound that had never healed properly. Other women came forward. Stories, confessions, anonymous recordings. A mosaic of pain and power. And through it all, my art business bloomed. Irony, I suppose, that I found the self I lost by painting the very sea I once thought might swallow me. Each morning, I opened my journal and added a line under a growing heading, Truths They Couldn't Steal. My hands make beautiful things. I loved my daughter with everything I had. He took advantage of both of us. I still matter. I added a final line the day I booked a train ticket home. I am no one's silence. Ruth hugged me when I left. She pressed something into my hand, a brush she had used in her first gallery show years ago. For luck, she said. I tucked it beside the brooch in my bag. It was time. Not for vengeance, not even for justice, though maybe it would come. It was time to be seen again. 2. Look them in the eyes, not as a mother desperate to be loved, but as a woman who had lived, broken, healed, and returned. The envelope was cream with a gold-foiled edge, heavy cardstock, tastefully anonymous. It arrived on Claire and Nathan's doorstep without a return address, just the name of a beachfront gallery they'd surely never heard of. The invitation was printed in silver script, An Evening of Memory and Sea. Artist, anonymous. Opening night. I imagined Claire reading it over morning coffee, the same way she once read acceptance letters and birthday cards, tilting her head, biting her lip. She never could resist a mystery. And Nathan, well, his pride would never let him stay away from anything billed as exclusive. I didn't have to guess. I knew they'd come. The gallery stood on the very beach where I'd once watched my daughter dance into a life that had no place for me. The tide had come and gone many times since. The sand remembered. Inside, the space was dimly lit. Soft amber sconces glowing like lanterns on a foggy shore. My paintings lined the whitewashed walls, the blue shutters of the house Claire was born in, her toddler fingers stained with watercolor, the old garden bench where she once read fairy tales beside me. Each piece held a breath I had once sacrificed. And then there was the final one. Inheritance, a canvas large enough to drown in. It showed a woman standing alone at the edge of a stormy sea. Her shadow stretched behind her, not into darkness, but into hundreds of fractured reflections. A young girl's laughter, a mother's open arms, the golden curve of a brooch clutched in her fist. I stood behind the curtain when they arrived. Claire wore pale blue, softer than I remembered, as if she wanted to disappear into it. Nathan wore a smug smile and an expensive coat he hadn't earned. Watched them walk through the gallery, pausing at the pieces like they were museum artifacts, not memories. Claire's face changed with each step. Her breath grew shallow. Her eyes darted. Then she stopped at inheritance. Her mouth parted. "Is that?" she whispered. Nathan squinted. "It's not her. It can't be." That's when I stepped out. I wore white linen and no shoes. My feet touched the polished floor like sand. I moved slowly, calmly, as if I had never once begged to be seen. People turned. A hush rippled. Claire looked up. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw the child I once braided hair for, the girl who fell asleep on my lap during thunderstorms. Her bottom lip trembled. I didn't speak. Not yet. I walked to her and opened my hand. In my palm, the opal brooch, whole, gleaming like moonlight. Her fingers reached before her mind could stop them. I placed it in her hand and whispered, This was yours, but so was I. Her face crumpled, not into sobs, but into something harder. Understanding. Shame. Recognition. Before Nathan could react, a quiet voice cut through the murmuring room. Mr. Nathan Everett? Two men in dark jackets stepped forward. Plain clothes. Measured. He turned, blinking. What is this? The taller one lifted a badge. We have a warrant for your arrest. Charges include financial fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of insurance. Claims! Gasps swept the room like gulls startled into flight. Nathan's smugness broke. His hands lifted instinctively, almost like surrender. This is a mistake, he stammered. I don't know what... They didn't need to argue. The flash drive had done its work. The article, the whistleblowers, the paper trail he'd underestimated. All of it had converged. Claire stood frozen, brooch clutched tight, her eyes darting like someone waking from anesthesia. You signed everything, I said quietly. Every lie. Her eyes filled with water. I didn't know, she whispered. I know, I replied, but you didn't want to. She made a small sound in her throat, half apology, half collapse. I let it float between us. I didn't need to catch it. Not anymore. I turned and walked out of the gallery. I didn't look back. Outside, the sky was violet, the waves whispering like old friends. I stepped onto the sand barefoot, cool grains rising between my toes. The gallery lights glowed, behind me like a dying lighthouse. Let them find their way without me. I kept walking, not in triumph, not in bitterness, but in peace. I walked until the only sound was the wind and the waves, until my breathing matched the rhythm of the sea. Later that night, I sat by my window in the cottage. My journal lay open, a fresh page waiting. I dipped my pen in ink and wrote. Sometimes, healing doesn't roar. Sometimes it's the echo of waves pulling back what was always yours. I paused, then underlined it. Outside, the sea sighed. Eternal. Inside, I smiled. Not out of spite. Not because I'd won, but because I had come back to myself. And this time I wasn't leaving.